Okay, that was a fun talk, isn't it? So we are at the last talk. Isn't it that sad now after a long day of really cool content? Okay. Oh, okay, cool. No problem. Okay, so next talk is going to be about serverless, which is serverless functions, which is quite an interesting topic for people that is doing mainly front end. This is a quite hot topic for back end, and seeing how that will work in the front end is really interesting. Looking forward to that. Usually we see Sarah doing these amazing animations and these awesome presentations, but I need to ask you something, and I've received some people asking me, we want to do the Mexican wave again. And this is the people from yesterday. And I mean, we are running out of time. So this is the last opportunity, actually. So sorry, Sarah.
No.
We will do it, how we can do it? We can do some diagonal thing, something complex now. Or maybe just easy. We do it easy, and you just say when it starts. So the Mexican wave is just the wave you see at the football matches. So it starts from one side. Let's start from this side over here, and then we go to the other side, and let's do a bounce. Okay? It doesn't stop there. It continues and goes back to the beginning, and then we leave it like this, like for the next 5 minutes. Like a background, and then I'll make a picture, okay? Is that cool? Let's see how long you can keep it, okay? And you can trigger it whenever you want, okay?
1, 2, no.
From that side, don't forget that.
Okay,
side.
from this side. 1, 2, 3, go.
Okay, cool. Let's see how long you can keep it, okay? Yeah, okay, some people is... I can see some struggle. Yeah, okay. Okay, Vue people, come on, give everything. Okay, yeah, enough? Is enough? Okay. Marvin just told me, please, Gerard, fill these next 5 minutes for me.
Yeah, well, the whole day went smooth until this point, but whatever. Yeah, well, I'll hand the microphone to Luke, because without Luke, this conference would not be here. And he has a small thank you to say to everyone, but here we go.
Hi, sorry guys, I missed my cue again. I did it yesterday as well. Just a list of people, so thank you very much. If we start clapping, you're not clapping me, you're just clapping the day, okay? Yeah, thank you. We thank you for the volunteers. Thank you for the... Come on! Should we try again? Gerard, can you do your thing where you do the clapping?
Okay, I knew this would happen. Okay, they told me. And in Spain, it never happens. Okay, so for you especially, a little bit of excitement. Come on. Was it a good conference? It was a cool conference. Look at this thing. Okay.
Thank you to the volunteers. Thank you to the catering company. Thank you to Theatre Amsterdam. Thank you to my team, Front End Love, Vue.js Amsterdam. Thank you to VMVA website. Thank you to Eric from Effectory who live streamed this. Thank you for Dario for the production. Thank you to the speakers. Thank you to Avenue. Thank you to Gerard Sands. And thank you to Sarah Drasner who's going to end the show. Thank you very much.
That was the most elaborate introduction I've ever gotten. This has been amazing. The whole conference has been amazing. I made you all give a round of applause to the organizers at the beginning of the conference, but I'm going to make you do it again. So one more round of applause to all of the organizers for putting this together. All right, let's talk about serverless functions and Vue.js. So how many people here can predict the future? Are there any Bitcoin millionaires in the room or like early Apple investors? A couple? All right, great. I'll be talking to you later. Okay, for the rest of us, when we launch an app, What immediately happens if we're successful is we run around and dance and jump in formal wear. But if we're really successful with our app, the first thing that happens is we have to scale our server. And I think a lot of us would want to believe that this is what we look like in that process. Like we've got a dope hoodie on, an unmarked laptop, and we're so good at programming that our fingers are literally on fire. But we probably look more like this. We're like in our older sister's raincoat, and we can't find the Q key. And even if we did, we don't know if we're going to exit Vim. Or the other scenario is that you don't necessarily fail, but you just didn't get as many signups as you wanted right out of the gate. And in that scenario, you're paying for all of the server space that you're not necessarily using, and John Travolta's in your wallet, and that's really awkward to explain to VCs. So either way, you can kind of scale from there, but scaling a server is a pain, and what if things, kind of kick up? So you're feeling kind of optimistic, and you don't necessarily want to. Which brings us to serverless. Serverless is the most clickbaity title for an actually interesting thing. I mean, it's true. The first thing that anyone's going to tell you when they talk about serverless is you're actually using servers. And that's true. You're actually still using servers. So why is it so interesting? Well, the promise of serverless is that you spend less time setting up and maintaining a server. So what we're focusing on is the part of the serverless function where you break it down and say, when this event occurs, execute this code, which for us Vue developers, I feel like that's a lot of the kind of logic that we're used to and we're kind of familiar with, and it's really, happy for us. So serverless becomes really compelling. And because it's these functions on a server, some people refer to it as FAS, or functions as a service. So I'm Sarah Drasner, known as Sarah Edo on Twitter. I work for Microsoft. Yeah. I'm also a Vue core team member, and I work for CSS Tricks. But I'm here today to talk to you about how you can integrate serverless functions for your Vue applications. So some of the benefits include not getting ourselves into the situation that I mentioned before. You're not scaling and maintaining that server. So anything that happens, if you're using a lot of it or not using a lot of it, you're only paying for that. And I'll let you in on a secret. Serverless is actually not really well priced, but for the customer. Like everyone started competing at these really low prices, so it's actually really, really cheap. So that's pretty great. So another thing is that you spend less time babysitting that server. And one thing that I like about it is the same kind of idea as functional programming. You're breaking things down into these small bits. And because you're breaking them down into small bits, they're reusable. So if you're using them for a couple of different applications, that's totally cool. The other thing that I kind of like about them is that it's the principle of least power. So in programming terms, that means using the least powerful technology to get a certain thing done. And that's, pretty elegant. So we mentioned before that serverless can be functions as a service, and there's a lot of as a service things out there, so I thought that I would break this down so it's a little less confusing. So this is an actual SVG animation. You can go to the code pen and stuff, but everything above the waterline is what you manage. So if we're looking at these different services, the first one, it would help if it started, right? Oh, go back. You can do it. All right, so here's infrastructure as a service. You can see that you're managing a lot, platform as a service, and functions as a service is really just the tip of that application level. So that's really all you're taking care of. So now when we usually deploy server-side software, we start with a host instance and we deploy the application within the host. In a serverless paradigm, we remove both and replace it with a vendor fast platform. And we don't manage that ourselves. So we'll deploy the functions to that platform. So then we can just focus on the logic, which is basically written as individual functions. So unlike the earlier host and application model, the function isn't continuously running. When an event is triggered, that's when the function is executed within the container. So all of these things sound really great. So should we serverless all the things? No, and don't Yeah, no, not really. Serverless is good for a few different use cases, some of which we'll cover today, but it doesn't do well for really long-running tasks. So if you think about WebSockets, anything where you're continuously talking to a server, so one example would be like if you have multiplayer games and everyone's chatting with each other, or real-time social streams, those are not really good things for serverless. So what is it good for? Let's talk about some of the benefits. Anything on a cron job is really great. So cleaning data on a cron job would be one really good example. Taking data and using it to create data visualizations, we're going to do that a little bit later on today. Cropping images that are given by the user and making user profiles out of them, you can totally do that in a serverless function. And in order to set up a function, it's pretty trivial. You set up a function here, and you can go to a free account, go to the portal like this, and we have a number of options that kind of auto-filter and get populated for us. And I'm from Microsoft, so I'm going to show you this stuff in Azure, but this is all totally doable in any other cloud provider as well. And I'll even show you the line of code where you would have to change to use other things. So basically, you can get started. Our validation is successful. And one of the things I want to point out, this is my first time using Keynote, and I got really excited about the fire. You want to be sure that you're using this consumption plan, because there's an app service plan. That consumption plan is the one that's going to scale automatically. If you pick app service plan here, you're going to have to manage it yourself, which I think kind of defeats the purpose of some of that serverless function magic. Okay, so right away, they kind of set us up with a test as soon as you make one. And I've simplified the test so it's easier to read, but I've also used tacos because that's very important. So in here, we've got this name that's delicious tacos in the side. That's the parameter that we're basically passing. And here in the function up here, we've got this context.res. That context is kind of like a console log. So we've got this body, and we're passing in that parameter. So we'll be able to pass that in here. And then we've got that context log. That's going to log down here. So it's kind of like you can use this to debug very easily. So now if we run that function, yeah, we get the output of this hello delicious tacos, a very important message. And we've also got our yo, yo, yo over here, which is, our output. So, yeah. So now you know how to set up a function. And it's just like the functions that you already know. You usually run them on the client, or you usually run them on your computer, and now you're just running them on a server. So they're very familiar. So let's put that knowledge to use and look at a really nice and kind of somewhat common use case and set up Vue, Stripe, and Serverless to create an e-commerce app. So here's a sample Vue application I made. The code is all open source. There comes a time in any young app's life where we're going to have to monetize, and probably the most direct way to do that is to get money from people. So we're going to set up this whole Stripe checkout and put in our credit card. This is a longer demo than I wanted it to be. And then we've got the success here. So we're going to look at how we set this up. And we don't really have the time to look at the entire application, so I'm giving you a bird's eye view of the structure. So I'm using Nuxt here, which it sounds like a lot of you guys are familiar with. So if you are familiar with Nuxt, or even if you're not, we've got the Vuex store, we've got some components, we've got some pages, and a layout. So that default layout and all of these pages are also .vue files. They're single file components. So we're able to use that really, really well with all of this stuff. And then we've got this serverless function here, which is our function, but we've also got a package from Stripe that we're going to talk about, and this Stripe. So Stripe is kind of the lowest hanging fruit here. It's super easy to set up, so let's look at that first. Once you make a Stripe account, you can confirm your identification or whatever, and right away, if you go to this API, oh, the spotlight, come on. All right, well, it's not working today. But that API that's blue in the corner there, that's the place where you're going to go, and you're going to see a bunch of testing keys that you can use right away. And Stripe, if you go to the documentation, they're going to expect Express, which is great because Express is very well known with everybody. But here are basically the things that we need to do. We need to create a Stripe customer, and we're going to pass in the amount, description, the currency, and the customer ID. But we're already on the server, so we don't need Express. That's super cool. How about that? So if we go back to our serverless function here, what we'll do is we're going to store that Stripe key, and that would be whatever your testing key is. And then that module.exports, that's the line that kicks off that serverless function. So that's the line that would be different in something else, in some other cloud provider. That's how you do it in Azure. So then we have a context.log that says starting to get down so that we know that things are kicked off. I like to check if we have everything we need before we start processing everything, so I have that. Then we have the same kind of code, right? We've got the Stripe customers, we're creating them, we're passing in these charges, and then at the end we'll finish up or we'll do some error logging. And you'll note I log a lot. That's so that if anything goes wrong, I know exactly what's going down. Okay, so now when we execute our function, in the test panel, we'll pass in exactly what we're going to need from the client, which is some test things. So we've got the Stripe email, the Stripe token, Stripe amount, just some basic things, and you can see everything's working. We got the Stripe charges. This has been completed, but let's just double check. And yes, we have success, because if we go back to the Stripe dashboard, you can see that there are some testing customers coming through. So that's really great. There is one more step that I usually do. You don't have to do. I like to host everything on GitHub. Part of the reason why I do this is twofold. One is that I can install packages really quickly. Another is that it's kind of I'm more used to that dev workflow. And there's a VS Code extension that allows you to use Azure functions and debug them right inside VS Code. And that's kind of nice, because then I can set breakpoints and all of that jazz. So we're not going to go into all of that today, but there's a post on CSS Tricks that I wrote that shows you how to do all of that. Now we've got one side done. We have to connect things between our server and our app. So first, let's talk about that Vuex store and our cart.vue page, because that Vuex store has the manifest file with all of our items for our shop, and that cart.vue page is that last page that you saw when we went through that checkout flow. So all of our products are in this big manifest in our Vuex store, and we're also storing our cart as well as the cart total. So you can see here, as I add items in our dev tools, we can see them updating in Vuex. So here's the shape of what we're finally going to be building on the cart.vue page, and we're going to fill this out together. So first we have, if the cart total is greater than 0, we're going to add the checkout. Then if it's empty, we'll give them the ability to go back to the main page and add items. And finally, if there's a success, we're going to let people know that it's being processed, and we'll add a success component. So looking at that first code block, if we have items in our cart, we'll show things that remind people of what they have bought, and how many things they've bought, the quantity and the price. And this is what that looks like out on the page. And basically, we're showing what's in the cart, but now we've got to actually build out that checkout form. So that's what that checkout form looks like. That's what we're going to build now. Now, the easiest way possible is to use this thing called Vue Stripe Checkout. That's literally just adding a button that will call this Stripe modal. And it's really great, and that's why I'm showing it to you. But I'm a control freak, and this wasn't good enough for me, because I actually wanted it styled like my app. I didn't want to just like a button embedded. I wanted to kind of make it look like a full experience. So in order to do that, I use this thing called Stripe Elements. And Stripe Elements were created by Stripe so that you could have that kind of fleshed out experience and style it like your app and make it look really embedded. It's a little bit more work, but it's not so much work. So we'll talk about how we integrate that. So we'll npm install or yarn add this thing called Vue Stripe Elements Plus. That's the one that I found that works the best. And it works really, really nicely. So let's look at that. We're going to go over the cart.vue page, and then we're also going to add that checkout.vue component. That's where we're going to hold all of that logic. So out of the box, this is what we get from that Vue stripe element plus component. It has a few defaults. A couple of notable things here. That stripe, that pk test xxx, that's where you put your testing key. The other thing is, you'll notice in the button, there's an @click play or pay, and that's something that we're going to dig into very heavily because that's where all of the magic is going to happen. So here's also the default stripe element we're importing, and basically, you have this method of pay here, which has a create token, which returns a promise, which resolves into an object with a token or error key. So basically, here we're just console logging, but we're going to do some cool stuff with that. So now we're going to configure it. We're going to store some data properties, so including whether it's submitted, whether it was completed, the status, and the response. We're also going to gather a little bit of information from our parent, which is that cart.vue component. So we'll need the total, and we're also going to communicate success. And when someone clicks that button, it kicks off that pay method, and that's where we have the create token promise, but we're also changing submitted to true, and we'll use Axios to post to the URL of our serverless function and send the email, the form, the token, and the total. If you're wondering where we got that URL from, if we go back to that dashboard, it's on the right here. That's where we get that function URL. So after that's complete, we change the status to success, clear the cart with a mutation in Vuex, and log in any errors. And because this is kind of the most important part of the talk, like that's the meat of the talk, let's talk about what we just did in that pay method. So to review, we use Axios to post our function to the function URL. We track whether or not it's submitted with the form or not with this.submitted. It sends the email, token, and total to our serverless function. If it's successful, it commits to our Vuex store. The mutation clears our cart, emits to the parent cart component, and if the payment is successful. And if it errors, it changes the status to failure, logs the response for help with debugging. So while the function works its magic, because we're communicating with the server, we're not necessarily sure how long that's going to take, we're going to show them a loader that's a few seconds long and is long enough to kind of keep them engaged and loops through. And what this does is it allows us to reduce the perceived wait time of that event. So if you show nothing, the user's like, did something happen? What's going on? So by showing this kind of loading component, you're allowing them to know, first of all, something's going on, and also something is showing and moving. So if you watch this for 3 seconds, it's not that big of a deal. And in the case of failure, I feel really bad for this cat. It's a really funny meme, but I feel really bad for this cat. We'll let them know that something didn't quite work, and we'll clear out anything that's set by the payment method, but we're not going to clear out the cart because we're going to try to allow them to do it again. In the case of success, we'll show a little successful animation. So we're going to pay with the credit card, and then we've got the loader, and then we've got this like nice little success animation, and then it has a set timeout that basically resets the cart so that it's not continually having all of that cart data. They know they can keep going shopping and keep buying more items. Now, that's not how you have to set up this user flow. That's just how I decided to set it up. So anything goes here, really. So here's where we are now. That success is actually a component of its own. It's still attached to the cart page. So let's look at that for a second. It looks like this. I made a CodePen demo for you too if you want to just check out that code. And we'll create a set timeout event that restarts the cart with a function on the parent emitted from here. So okay, remember this view? We had all of these things that we were going to fill out. Let's look at what we did. All right, we created our cart, imported our checkout component that also tracks a successful payment. If the cart is empty, then we let them fill it up and go back to the home page. If the payment was successful, we show a success component, restart the cart on a set timeout, and clear out what we had. So, all right, you did it. Party, we have all the cash now. We're super ballers. In a real production app, you'd need a couple more things. Testing is a big one. Switching the testing key over to production and Stripe is another. You'd probably also just want to send that item and have the serverless function calculate the price. But all of this stuff, the whole application and the serverless function exist in open source and GitHub repos of mine. So if you want to check it out, set it up yourself, play with it, you're pretty much good to go. Cool. All right, with the time we have left, let's do one more thing. I mentioned earlier that we can use a serverless function to fetch data for beautiful front-end visualizations, so let's do that next. So as I mentioned before, I work for Microsoft as a cloud developer advocate, and people often ask me where my team is speaking and when. So I made this demo with Three.js and Vue and a library and serverless functions so that people can kind of explore where we're going to go and where we're going to be in the future. So here I'm executing a serverless function to gather geolocation data for the globe based on how much we're speaking and where. So when I asked my coworkers for all of their data, and we all put it in this giant Excel file, which is like really crazy to do, we export that as a JSON file, and then I basically have all of this information. So I have all of this in JSON file, a bunch of entries like this. But in order to use that data visualization, what I need to do is I need to get the latitude and the longitude for each one of these entries. And I'm a lazy programmer, so I want the computer to do that work for me. Also we're going to, calculate that stuff up front so that we're not doing it on the client. It's much faster. So the cool part is you already know how to make a serverless function and all the defaults. Well, we're going to make this kind of the same way, but they have this template for a GitHub webhook. So basically, I can say anytime I check something into a Vuex store or a JSON file or something push to master, it's going to automatically run that serverless function. The serverless function is going to say, oh, I have a new JSON file. I'm going to go look up all of that geolocation data again. So here in the serverless function, we're going to retrieve geolocation data for each item in the original data, and not shown here. We're going to error if it doesn't go well. Great, so now, given an array of entries wrapped in an iterator, we'll walk through each of them and populate the latitude and longitude using the Google Maps API. So we're going to also cache locations and try to save some API calls. There's more code that I'm not showing here that just would be crazy to put on a slide, but it's all open source, so you can check it out later. After this, we're going to check the cache and see if they already have that location as well to just, make good use of the cache. So now we see our function at work. It's taking all of the locations in our JSON file in GitHub. It's looking up the locations with Google Maps API, updating it for quick retrieval in Vuex, which is our central state management store. And we'll use this for the table and for the Three.js globe. So before we had this, and now we have latitude and longitude for each entry, and it's updated, and we can now use that. Then here, remember how fast that was when we typed in the input and the table filtered really, really quickly? Well, if you're, advanced Vue user, you know why that was. But if you're not, we're using a computed property here to allow them to search in that field. So if you're not familiar with computed properties, this is a key feature of Vue. It's really important to understand. So computed properties in Vue are incredibly useful. They're calculations that are cached based on their dependencies and will only updated when they're needed, which means that they're extremely performant when used well. So computed properties aren't like methods. They kind of look like they're methods, but you see that filtered data right there? We can use that like data instead of an event that we're going to fire. So you can consider this like a different view into our data. So if we look over here at this table, you can see we used filtered data. Now you see in that v4, we're saying post I in filtered data. We're using that computed property directly, just like it was data. So here you can see it in action. It's like super fast and super slick. And in a lot of other ways, this would take a long time to implement. But Vue allows us to do this so quickly and efficiently. It's really, really great. So you might have noticed that on our globe, we have a pin for each latitude and longitude, but they get longer based on how we have repeat occurrences. So we have to make it longer for each repeat instance and not have duplicates. So we'll check if the location already exists. If it does, we'll increment it, and if not, we'll create a new value for them. And we'll use data in this format to feed our globe visualization. And the globe visualization is done with Three.js, which we mount into the DOM in a single element. That's kind of how you use Three.js. So we're calling it on the mounted function because we're not mounting it into the DOM. And just as a side note, if you decide to use Three.js, I found it works the best if I use that load texture directly in-mounted and pass it into something where I'm knitting the globe instead of calling it within the method. That seems to allow it to work the most efficiently. And not that you'd want to do this, but because Vue and 3.js play so nicely together, we can easily update the appearance of this globe. Like, I just changed this one line of code from sphere geometry to icosahedron geometry, and you can use any number of shapes, and it still works. So don't do this, but maybe do some other kinds of experiment with 3.js. So we can create any myriad projects with Vue and 3.js, and the world of data visualization is really our oyster. Serverless in Vue will allow us to accomplish a lot of things without a lot of infrastructure. So it's so cool how these technologies play well together and allow us to accomplish so much so quickly. So I hope this helps you get started pairing Vue and serverless in the future. Thank you.